Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's proceed with still our discussion on the different types of tests. Do you remember last time we talked about three different types of tests? The true or false, multiple choice, and matching type. All these three belong to one general type of test we call alternative response type of test or selection type of test. Today we shall take up another set of tests which we call supply types. And today I'm going to discuss with you two types, the completion and essays, both very familiar to you. All right, let's start with the supply types. I'll start with suggestions. This is a very common type of test to you. Everybody has gone through this, starting from your elementary up to college. This is what we call this filling in the blanks. So who is not familiar with you? Uh, who is not familiar of this among you? So let's try to discuss some good ways of writing completion or supply types. First, if at all possible, items should require a single word answer, to facilitate checking, or a brief and definite statement. We are cautioned against making statements that are so indefinite that they may be logically answered by several terms. So, in other words, answers that or blanks that would be open to many answers. We must avoid this. So, let's look at the poor item. One might write, World War II ended in. It could be answered by year or it could be answered by place. So a better item would be World War II ended in the year if we want the answer to be year. Okay, so I think that's clear enough to you. Let's go to the second suggestion. Be sure the question or statement poses a problem to the examinee. A direct question is often more desirable than an incomplete statement. So, direct question like who, where, when, the W things, the W questions. No? Okay. That requires, of course, a single answer. Would be better than the filling the blanks. Other test makers would call this identification. Okay, let's go to the third one. Be sure that the answer that the student is required to produce is factually correct. Be sure the language used in the question is precise and accurate in relation to the subject matter area being tested. That's clear enough. Number 4, omit only keywords. Don't eliminate so many elements that the sense of the content is impaired. Let's look at the example here of a poor item. Ferdinand Magellan discovered a blank in his travel to the blank in blank. That's too choppy. So there should only be, as much as possible, one blank to fill in. Like a better statement would be, Ferdinand Magellan discovered the blank in his travel to the east in 1521. So this has got only one blank to fill in. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Okay. Let's go to the next guideline. Where the statement such that the blank is near the end of the sentence rather than near the beginning. So in other words, let's not begin a sentence with a blank. It's a no. It's a no in completion type. Next, if the problem requires a numerical answer, indicate the units in which it is to be expressed. All right, I'd like to introduce to you, maybe you have heard it, maybe so many of you have not heard it, but it is usually given also as part of what we call supply type. And this is the closed procedure or the closed test. This is a special supply type of test which is simply filling in blanks to supply missing information. Here, the words are deleted from a passage and the student must construct meaning from the text to fill them in. Let's try to see an example. Okay, an example of closed test. Well, everybody is familiar with the Local Government Code of 1991. You took this up in college. And I got the declaration of the policy or the policy statement, which everybody must know. So how many blanks are there then? What did we omit here? Important concepts. Like, for example, it is hereby declared the policy of the blank. Even if you're not familiar probably with the policy statement, I think you would be able to answer this by simply looking at the context. It is hereby declared the policy of, who declares a policy? It's the state. Okay? So it is hereby declared the policy of the state that the territorial and political subdivisions, we know that our country is divided into political subdivisions. So in other words, you are going to think of a possible problem that even if you're not familiar with the policy statement, you would be able to answer by just looking at the context. Okay? So you're now familiar with the closed test. Maybe if you're teaching Constitution, you can make as an example, because everybody must know the preamble of the Constitution. So you can make that as a closed test. Maybe the Lupang Hinirang, if the students, you would know if the students know how to sing it properly with appropriate words. Maybe you could put that as a closed test. You can select something that the students must know about, so you can test their mastery. Okay, particularly probably in your own respective subjects, you have something that you would like the students to master. Okay, then you can give that as a closed test. Now, this one is very familiar to you. You had been through this from elementary again up to college. You had been given essay items. So an essay item is a supply type of test. We know that an essay item is one for which the student supplies rather than selects the correct answer. The student must compose a response, often extensive, to a question for which no single response or pattern or responses can be cited as correct to the exclusion of all other answers. The accuracy and quality of such a response can often be judged only by a person skilled and informed in the subject area being tested. That's why we as teachers are expected to be master of the subjects that we are teaching. So if we give an essay, it's only we who can check those essays. We cannot get others to check the essays for us like we do when we give objective tests. We can just ask some students or a brother or sister to check the objective test, but not the essay. It's only the expert, and you as a classroom teacher teaching a particular subject given to you is the expert in checking the essay test. What's the advantage of an essay item? Essay items should measure complex cognitive skills or processes. That's why we don't give as essay items questions like who, when. These are not for essay types of tests. Questions like how, what if, why lend themselves to being answered using essay items. Now, or rather complex cognitive skills require students to organize, integrate, and synthesize knowledge, use information to solve novel problems, or to be original and innovative in problem solving. We can say whether an item is a good essay test items if that item requires the students to think critically. So you can judge the quality of or the mindset of your teacher by the manner by which they ask questions. What kind of questions? Essay questions. I'll repeat. Good essay questions should require students to think critically. Let's take a look at this illustration. What do we mean by thinking critically? It is making sense of the world by carefully examining the thinking process to clarify and improve our understanding. So, what sort of questions can be given so that we can encourage our students to think critically? As you can see in the diagram, thinking critically is carefully exploring situations with questions. Thinking critically is thinking independently. Thinking critically is viewing situations from different perspectives. Thinking critically is supporting diverse perspectives with reasons and evidence. It is discussing ideas in an organized way and thinking actively. We can start doing this during our discussions in class. You cannot, as they say, you cannot give an essay question of this sort of complex thinking processes unless you have given a chance to students to use this in the classroom. Now, this is the disadvantage, when we have discussions like this. We can, in a face-to-face discussion, we can explore all of this. A teacher can ask the students questions that would encourage them to think critically, but not in this case, not not in this kind of discussion. It's really very, very important. Face-to-face instruction, there's no really substitute for a face-to-face instruction where you can interact with the students. Of course, there is a possibility also of doing an interactive discussion, but not in this case when, well, maybe when we have a laboratory where the classroom is a laboratory. I am sitting here and you are sat there in a laboratory. You are equipped with and then we can interact. We call it teleconferencing or teleconference. Okay, we can do active interaction, but not this kind. Video recording that will be passed on to you. It's really it's not a very good way of uh, putting across ideas. Not this way. Okay, so you now understand what thinking critically is, and you can make questions in essay form that explores this process. Okay, let's consider this question. What methods have been, this could be given by a teacher in an essay type of test. What methods have been used in some manufacturing firms to prevent industrial accidents? In fact, this is an essay question, but look, what learning outcome is being tested? If the reading has been given to the students have read a paragraph to answer this, they can very well just recall answer to this question. There isn't much thinking to be done here. Simply recalling what he probably or she has read in a paragraph or so. Now compare the above question with this. Examine the data provided in Table 2. So in other words, the Table 2 is the prompt. You have a Table 2 there with data. So examine the data provided in Table 2 on causes of accidents. And then you ask the students to explain how the introduction of occupational health and safety standards in a certain country accounts for changes in the number of industrial accidents as shown in the table. And then you ask them to consider at least 3 specific occupational health and safety standards in their response. And you also ask them to limit their response to 1/2 page. So it's very, very specific what you want them to do. Which of the two questions is phrased better? As you can see, of course, the second question is more focused. Very, very specific, telling the students exactly what kind of answer you want from them and how long. Okay, so if you must give an essay question, be sure that you are focused, you are more specific, like this example, the second example, rather than the first. Now we have two kinds of essay items, what we call the extended or restricted response. Essay items can vary from a lengthy, open-ended end of semester term papers. So in other words, 20 pages, 30 pages, 50 pages. So something that, an essay that would ask them to develop over a period of time with a number of references. In fact, some would say with no fewer than 20 references, printed or online. So lengthy, open-ended, end of the semester term papers or take-home tests that have flexible page limits, like you see in the example. 10 to 12 pages, 20 pages, and so on. Don't ask them to develop essays with so many pages because you are just burdening yourself. Unless, of course, you don't check the essays of your students. Some, I'm sorry to say this, but some teachers, just to kill time, would ask their students to write an essay. Afterwards, the essays are just put in the drawers, not returned to the students. My dear friends, no? Students expect their teachers to return the essays. Not just return with grades of A, B, C, 95, 85, but they have to be returned with remarks, including question marks, exclamation points, you know. They mean something when they see that in their essays. And what is very important when you return the papers that you ask them to write are the remarks that you write on the margin of the essay. So marginal notes are very, very important to the students. I think you're elated, you feel so happy when you see your papers returned with beautiful remarks from your teachers. Your students will never forget you for making them feel better with the remarks that you write on their essays. So it behoves upon you, teachers, to return the essays written by your students, especially if they spent so much effort writing the essays. You'll just put them in the drawer. Oh, that's unforgivable, ladies and gentlemen. So whatever we get from them, we return to them with what? With remarks. As much as possible, pleasant remarks. Of course, there are, remarks that are not so pleasant, like negative remarks, but these negative remarks can sound friendly, instead of harsh. Don't be so mean to your students. Again, they'll not forget. I'm sorry, they're not going to forget you for being mean to them. So, as much as possible, let's have a friendly stance when it comes to our relationship with our students. Okay? I was talking about how essay items vary. Okay? We have extended response essay items, and we have what we call restricted response essay items. The extended response essays allow students to determine the length and complexity of response. Kaya nga extended, no? But don't let it be so extended as to make it so boring to read. No? So still we have to specify the length. No more than. Okay. And we also have, all right, let's take this. Take a look at this example of extended response essays. Identify as many different ways to generate electricity as you can. Give the advantages. This is another one that you would want to ask your students to put in their essays. Give the advantages and disadvantages of each and how each might be used to provide the electrical power requirements of a medium-sized city like Legazpi City. So there is the quality that you're asking for them or from them. Requirements of a medium-sized city like Legazpi City. You are telling them that their response will be graded. On what aspects? On accuracy and their evaluation of how practical each source of electricity would be if implemented. So in other words, they can let their imagination go wild. But is it practicable as far as Legazpi City is concerned? If they put in their essays, those things, then maybe you can start writing funny remarks about them. So not necessarily hurting them. Those may be those imaginary, very out of this world. Could sound funny. All right, so anyway, but will not be considered because you are talking about practicality. So your response will be graded on its accuracy and your evaluation of how practical each source of electricity would be if it implemented. Here is now the limits you're setting. Your response should be 12 to 15 pages in length and will be evaluated based on the scoring criteria distributed in class. So in other words, there must always be a set of criteria to use when you are evaluating a thesis. We will not discuss this first here, but in our next lecture on alternative assessment, I'm going to present to you some rubrics for evaluating essays. All subject areas, I suppose, require students, or teachers of all subject areas require students to write essays. So you must learn how to make rubrics for your particular content area. Here is another aspect that the students are graded on. For maximum credit, be sure that your response addresses each of the scoring criteria components. In the case of projects, I'm digressing a little. In the case of projects, before you ask the students to make projects, you have to be very clear about what you would ask them to show or demonstrate in the finished product. So the criteria for judging a project must be discussed with the students. I'll discuss this lengthily in our next meeting. Rubrics for project evaluation. It's very important that this is discussed beforehand with the students. In fact, it's even more important if you engage the students to participate in the drafting of the evaluation criteria. We will discuss that later on. What I'm trying to say here is be sure that the students understand the points that you would like seen or read in their essays. They should know what they are graded upon in their essay. And this should, maybe you can discuss this orally with the students before giving them the essay to write. So this is an example of extended response essay. Let's go to the restricted response essay. Okay, an example would be list the major similarities and differences between the views of Jose Rizal and Andres Bonifacio about the Philippine Revolution against Spain. Limit your answer to 1 page. Your score will depend on accuracy, organization, and brevity. So it's very clear here what you are asking the students to do. Similarities and differences. So they must, first of all, read about the differing views of Jose Rizal and Andres Bonifacio about the Philippine Revolution. Similarities and differences. You should see this. The students must include this in their essays. What else are you scoring the students' work on? Accuracy, organization, and brevity. So it's very important that rubrics used in scoring essays could be, tell them if it is holistic or analytic. I will discuss this later. No? Now, as early as today, you should start looking for examples of rubrics online or in books. You need this because there is an activity that you need to do in connection with this next time. So start collecting as many as, at least 10 will be okay. Huh? That will be the third activity. The final activity will be a collection of rubrics. You will read that in our next meeting. Is that clear? What are you going to collect? Rubrics. Rubrics for role play, rubrics for um, essays, rubrics for projects, rubrics for any activity that you will ask your students to do. Okay? Here are a few suggestions for writing essay items. Okay. Have clearly in mind what mental processes you want the students to use before starting to write the question. Would you want them to compare, to contrast? Would you like them to present arguments for or against? Would you like them to analyze? Would you like them to synthesize? Would you like them to organize? Okay, these are mental processes. Would you like them to forecast, project? So you must have a very clear, direction for what you would want the students to write about. Let's look at this example. Do not just write questions like criticize the 2020 SONA by President Rodrigo Duterte. What will the students include? This is a very broad question. You can write 50 pages, 100 pages criticizing the SONA of the president, but do you like that? So what is it that you would want to see in the essays of the students? So a better item would be, like you see on the screen, consider the 2020 SONA. By the way, did you listen to the SONA? Oh, you should. You should have. Anyway, a better item would be consider the 2020 SONA by President Rodrigo Duterte. Focus on the section dealing with economic policy and discriminate between factual statements and opinions. List these statements separately, label them, and indicate whether each statement is or is not consistent with the president's overall economic policy. Perhaps you are teaching economics, no? And so, as you can see, you can distinguish between the two poor, better item. The better item is more, as you can see, specific, focused, telling the student what exactly you would want them to include in their essays. Let's continue. Write the questions, or rather, write the question to clearly and unambiguously define the task to the students. Tasks should be explained in the overall instructions preceding the questions, and in the test items themselves. Indicate whether spelling and grammar will be counted, and indicate whether organization of the response will be an important scoring element. Let's take a look at the poor item I've given as an example. What were the forces that led to the EDSA revolution in 1986? Very broad, very recall type. Maybe you ask them to read an article talking about the forces. So this kind of question will simply ask the students to recall what they have read. This is not a very high level cognitive process. Let's look at the second example, a better example. A better item would be compare and contrast the positions of the pro-Marcos and the anti-Marcos at the outbreak of the EDSA revolution, including your discussion, economic conditions, foreign policies, political sentiments, and social conditions. So you would want these aspects seen in the essays of your student, which of course are not mentioned in the earlier item, the poor one. Okay, next. Start essay questions with such words or phrases as compare, contrast, give reasons for, give original examples of, predict what would happen if, and so on. These are high-level, complex questions, no? You are cautioned not to begin. Do not begin with such words as what, who, when, and list, because those words generally lead to tasks that require only recall of information, like you see here. A poor item is, in the story Hawaiian Mystery, who made the decision to take the path by the sea? This is more of an identification kind of question rather than an essay. So a better one would be give 3 reasons. This is a restricted type of essay, no? Give 3 reasons why in the story Hawaiian Mystery, Alicia decided to take the path by the sea and predict what would have happened if they had stayed on the mountain for another night. Okay, predicting is extending. It's not, it's reading beyond the story. It's not in the story, but you would want the student, I mean, yes, the students, to have to extend their imagination by trying to predict what would have happened. Okay. But to give three reasons why in the story, I decided to take the path by the sea. Maybe, just maybe, this was discussed in the story, the first one. The latter part, and predict what would happen, is, asking the students to extend their imagination. So, the better item, as you can see on the screen, ask students to exercise more complex cognition processes rather than the first one, simply recall. Okay, next. A question dealing with controversial issues should ask for and be evaluated in terms of the presentation of evidence for a position rather than, take note, presentation of evidence for a position taken rather than the position itself or the position taken. So even if your position is affirmative, the student is negative, he should be judged according to the arguments he presented, not yours. Okay? So a question dealing with controversial, kaya nga tinatawag nating controversial is because there are two opposing sides. And, well, maybe you are taking a different view, your students are taking different view. It would not matter the way you score the paper. No? Your view should not matter in the manner by which you score the paper, but the arguments presented by the students. I'll repeat. A question dealing with controversial issues should ask for and be evaluated in terms of the presentation of evidence for a position, rather than the position taken. You are a very devout Catholic, a very religious Christian, and so you oppose, for example, abortion. But your position, you are strongly opposing abortion, but some of your students are also have a very strong view in favor of abortion. So your position should not matter, but the arguments presented by the students. It is not defensible to demand that the student accept a specific conclusion or solution, but it is reasonable to assess how well the student has learned to use the evidence on which a specific conclusion is based. So it's a very, essays are very good at measuring the high level of cognition exercised by students. Let's look at this four item here. What law or laws should Congress pass to improve the services of PhilHealth? Controversy about PhilHealth now. Okay. So maybe you have discussed this in your class, and in the end, you want the students to present their views about what the government can do. All right. But as you can see here, a poor item would be, what laws should Congress pass to improve the services of PhilHealth? A better one would be, some feel, remember this is controversial, some feel that PhilHealth has been defrauding its members. Do you agree or disagree? Support your position with at least three reasons, as discussed in the Senate and congressional hearings. Now, before you give this essay question, be sure that your students listened to the congressional hearings. In other words, you should have assigned them to listen to listen to the congressional hearing. Or if they did not have the material time to do so, then you could have asked the students to record the congressional hearings, because you cannot give this kind of question if they have not listened to the congressional hearings. All right. So you can see the contrast of the poor item and the better item. Another suggestion is establish reasonable time and or page limits for each essay question to help the student complete the question and to indicate the level of detail for the response you have in mind. Indicate such limits in the statement of the question. You have seen that in the previous examples I've shown to you. Use essay questions with content and objectives that cannot be satisfactorily measured by objective items. Because if it can be measured by objective items, like asking the students to recall, asking the student, okay. So it should be given as objective items, not essay items. Okay, this one, take note of this, because some teachers are doing this. Perhaps you have met some of this in your previous courses in college. Take note. Avoid using optional items. That is, require all students to complete the same items. If there are 5 essay questions there, then ask them to complete all 5 questions. Allowing students to select 3 or 5, 4 of 7, and so forth, take note, decreases test validity and decreases your basis for comparison among students for very obvious reasons. Generally, students, especially if let's say, 5 questions that you have included, 5 of them all scored equally, 5 points, 5 points, 5 points, 5 points, So generally, students would choose the ones that they know. They know what to write about. So others would also choose differently. So how will you know? No? That the students know this and did not know this adequately, etc. So there would be no basis for comparison among your students. Sabi dito, it decreases your basis for comparison among students. And very importantly, it decreases test validity. I'll repeat, avoid using optional items. Let the students answer all the essay questions that you have put in. Okay. Be sure each question relates to an instruction's objective. So in other words, please do not give an essay that has not been discussed in class as far as content is concerned. Because that kind of essay question is definitely invalid, because it's not in your instructional objective. All right? Now, before we move on to the table of specifications, let me remind you, please. For today, later, I will explain to you that you are supposed to do 3 exercises. Exercise 1, 2, 3. And you are expected to do 2 activities. Remember, Nene, non-completion of this will mean incomplete. In my previous classes, I've given them a lot of exercises and activities, but I'm limiting what I'm requiring you to do to only 3 exercises and 2 activities. Aside from the lecture that I have, I'm giving you also additional notes to read. I'm also giving you, please take note, 3 quizzes, 10 items each, and then a long test. Okay? The 3 tests will be given to you through the Google Classroom. But the table, not the table specification, but the long test, 40 items, will be through Edmodo. Okay? So I'll stop for the moment and move on to another topic later.